The sun crept over the cracked sidewalks of South Bellevue, casting gold light on a man who had long stopped noticing the morning. Darius King, age 62, moved quietly through the alleys, his steps slow but deliberate. His backpack, worn to threads, bounced against his back as he paused near an old brick church and knelt beside a dumpster. "For you, Sergeant," he murmured, placing half a peanut butter sandwich beside an overturned trash bin. A stray dog with a torn ear and tired eyes slinked out from the shadows, sniffing the food cautiously before devouring it with surprising gentleness. Darius smiled faintly, the closest thing to a conversation he'd had in days. He patted the dog's head once, twice. "Same time tomorrow," he promised, then stood upright, adjusting the straps on his bag, which dug into shoulders that had once carried combat packs through war zones. To those walking by, Darius was just another homeless man, someone to be avoided, pitied, or ignored. And he didn't mind. Being unseen had its advantages. It kept people from asking about the tremors that woke him up at 3 a.m. or the scars that ran deeper than his skin. By the time the afternoon sun beat down on the pavement, Darius had filled a trash bag with enough aluminum cans to exchange for maybe $2. It wouldn't stretch far, but he knew where to go. There was a corner store not far from St. Luke's Church, Mason's Mart. It wasn't much, but the back exit of the shop led directly to the church's shelter alcove, and the employees usually left him alone. Inside, the store's clerk, Kyle Benson, was arguing into his phone. Early 30s, sharp jawline, and a constant expression like the world owed him money. "I said Friday! It's only Monday!" he barked into the receiver, smacking the counter as he spoke. "Don't call me again unless you got something useful to say." He hung up, muttering curses, just as Darius stepped up with a crumpled dollar and some coins. "Water," Darius said, voice hoarse. Kyle glanced at the money, then at the man. Something shifted in his face. Maybe a need to feel superior, maybe just frustration looking for a target. "You think this is a soup kitchen?" he snapped, sliding the coins back. "Price changed. Come back when you can afford it." Darius didn't argue. "Same price yesterday." "Well, it ain't yesterday," Kyle said, his tone sharp. "Get out before you stink up the place." As Darius calmly reached to retrieve his change, Kyle grabbed his wrist. "You think you can just come in here and take? Think again." "Let go," Darius said. His eyes were calm but focused, a focus honed not by anger but by training, something that might have warned someone more observant. But Kyle wasn't that. Instead, he shoved Darius backward, slamming him into a rack of potato chips. "Get out, you worthless." The slur that followed was sharp, deliberate, and venomous. Darius caught himself on the shelf. He didn't advance or flinch. He stood still, spine straight, expression unreadable. His stance shifted slightly, not in threat, but in discipline. Kyle reached for his phone. "I'm calling the cops. This guy just threatened me." Darius, already stepping out the door, heard Kyle's distorted cries to the dispatcher. "He said he'd torch the place. Tried to rush the counter. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser screeched to a stop outside the store. Officers Paul Gregory, Mike Logan, and Jason Turner climbed out, synchronized like men who'd done this dance before. Gregory, the eldest and sporting sergeant stripes, took the lead. Darius was sitting on a bench outside, hands folded calmly. In his lap, he didn't run. He knew how that looked to them. "That him?" Gregory asked. Kyle nodded, puffing up with false confidence. "That's the guy. Came in aggressive, wouldn't pay, then threatened to burn the place down." Darius rose slowly, his hands open and visible. "Didn't say any of that," he said plainly. "Hands up," Gregory barked, closing the distance fast. "They are," Darius replied. Gregory didn't like that. With no warning, he lunged, slamming Darius to the pavement. His skull cracked against the concrete. Blood pooled. Quickly, "Stop resisting!" Gregory yelled, although Darius hadn't moved. Across the street, a woman raised her phone. "He's not doing anything," she shouted. Turner crossed the road, grabbed her wrist, and twisted until she dropped the phone. He crushed it underfoot. "Interference in an active investigation," he said flatly. Another bystander lifted his phone from a parked car. Logan approached, hand on his holster. "Move along." "I'm on public property," the man said. "And you're about to be arrested for obstruction," Logan warned. The man drove off. Darius didn't resist when they cuffed him. Blood slid down his temple, but his gaze remained distant, as if detached from the scene entirely. Gregory leaned in, sneering. "Get him in the car." Turner and Logan lifted him, his legs dragging. Limply, they shoved him into the back seat, his head smacking the doorframe. On the ride, Gregory mocked, "What was that? Talking to your invisible troops back there?" Darius didn't respond. His lips moved quietly, like a man reciting a prayer or orders. Gregory smirked. "This one's gonna stick, just like the rest. No one misses trash." At the station, they moved quickly. Darius was fingerprinted, photographed, and placed in a holding cell. Turner filled out paperwork, while Gregory and Logan took Darius's tattered backpack into an interview room. "Let's make it official," Gregory said, pulling a pocket knife and dropping it into the bag. Logan added a bottle of pills. "Found during search," Gregory dictated. "Suspect became aggressive, threatened clerk and officers." Outside the jail, the city kept moving, unaware of what had just been erased. Before we continue the story, if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel. It really helps us keep making stories like this. That same evening, in a corner office of the county courthouse, public defender Naomi Grant flipped through the final files of her exhausting 12-hour shift. She was 28, sharp, and already carried the weary posture of someone who'd seen the justice system twist itself into pretzels to protect the powerful. Her office desk overflowed with manila folders, each one representing a life tangled in bureaucracy, bad luck, or both. As she grabbed her bag, her mentor, Robert Vance, called out from the hallway, "Naomi, got one last folder for you," she groaned. "I've already hit my limit, Rob." "I know," he said with a sympathetic smile, "but this one's special. No one else wants it." She hesitated, then took the file. The name on the tab read, "Darius King. Charges, assault, resisting arrest, possession of illegal weapon, suspected drug involvement." "Gregory again?" Naomi asked, her brow furrowing. "Fourth time this month," Vance said. "Same M.O. All homeless, all minorities, all conveniently caught with something illegal." Naomi sighed, flipping open the folder. "Let me guess. Judge Franklin's courtroom?" "Bingo," Vance said. "And you know how he rules with Griggs on the arrest?" "I'll tread carefully," she said, closing the folder. "But something tells me this one's different." The next morning, Naomi met Darius in the interview room at the county jail. He sat unnaturally still, hands folded on the table, eyes fixed on the stained wall behind her. A bruised bandage covered the wound on his head, sloppily applied. His presence was quiet but firm, like someone who knew how to sit in silence without being small. "Mr. King, I'm Naomi Grant, public defender," she began gently. "I've been assigned to your case." He didn't move. "I need to understand. What happened at the store?" she continued. "The report says you became violent and that a weapon and drugs were found in your backpack." Still no response. Naomi leaned forward. "Mr. King—" "Sergeant King," he said quietly, interrupting for the first time. "First Recon, Special Joint Task Operations. That's all I'll say." She blinked. "You served?" He didn't. "Answer again." Naomi tried a few more questions, but Darius had withdrawn behind the same steel wall she'd seen in other veterans. He wasn't going to open up without reason. As she left, she passed Officer Gregory in the hallway. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching her. "Another rookie trying to clean up the streets," he said with a smirk. "Good luck." She didn't respond, just walked past him, jaw clenched. Back at her desk, Naomi typed, "Special, Joint Task Operations," into every legal and military database she could access. Most of the results were redacted, One line stood out, a now declassified task unit from the early 2000s that operated across hostile zones under joint command. The trail quickly vanished after 2010. She frowned. "Who are you, Darius King?" she whispered. A few days later, she was still digging. Every database search came up cold. Darius had no criminal history beyond one trespassing charge from over 20 years ago, a case that had been dropped. Since then, it was like he'd vanished. No bills, no tax filings, no credit, no social media, like someone had erased him from public life. Then her phone buzzed, a message from a court clerk friend. "Police report just uploaded. Sending it over now." Naomi scanned it quickly. The description listed Darius as approximately 40, when his intake form clearly said he was 62. The report also alleged he threatened officers, but no bodycam footage was included. Unusual, given the aggression described. Something wasn't right. At Murphy's Tap, a dive bar near the precinct, Gregory, Logan and Turner nursed drinks in their usual booth. "Should have seen his face," Gregory laughed, slapping the table. "Trying to act all composed, until I dropped him." "You and your love of drama," Turner chuckled. "Thought you were going to start quoting the Constitution next." "Guy barely said anything," Logan added. "Made it easy. Knows he's already done." The bartender wiped the counter slowly, trying to appear distracted while secretly recording audio with his phone under the bar. The conversation unsettled him, but he knew better than to speak out loud. Still, he'd seen too much over the years to ignore this. "We need to clean house before someone upstairs starts sniffing again," Gregory muttered. "Relax," Turner said. "Judge Franklin signs whatever we put in front of him. He owes me after last year." Meanwhile, Naomi returned to the store where the arrest took place. She introduced herself to Kyle Benson, who crossed his arms the second he saw her. "I already gave my statement," he said. "I'm not here to argue, just to understand," Naomi replied. "There are inconsistencies in the report. Other witnesses said Mr. King was sitting quietly when police arrived." Kyle's face turned red. "Those people didn't see what happened inside. Did someone encourage you to say what you did?" Naomi asked, gently but firmly. "Because false statements are a serious offense." Kyle grabbed the store phone. "You need to leave right now." She walked out, but her instincts confirmed it. He was hiding something. That night, at the county jail, a guard named Marcus Bell walked the halls with a neutral expression. As he passed Darius's cell, another officer, Jenkins, accidentally tipped a food tray. The watery stew splashed all over Darius's shirt. "Oops," Jenkins sneered. "You failed that drill, soldier boy." Darius didn't react. Bell arrived behind Jenkins a moment later, handing Darius a towel. Loudly, he said, "Clean up," then leaned in and whispered, "Don't let them break you." Darius's eyes flickered, not surprise but acknowledgement. Then his stillness returned. Outside the jail, Naomi met with a former army medic named Devon Price, whom she had helped defend years earlier. She slid a photo of Darius across the table at the coffee shop. "Ever seen this man?" Devon stared at the image, then at the close-up of a faded tattoo on Darius's wrist. "Where did you find this guy?" "He's my client," she said. Devon exhaled sharply. "That's no regular unit. That's symbols from an elite squad they pretend doesn't exist. Ghost missions, real shadow stuff." "What kind of missions?" Naomi asked. "The kind they bury with silence," Devon said. "You're messing with something real old, real dangerous." Naomi's hand trembled slightly as she picked up the photo again. The puzzle was starting to come together, and the bigger picture was far more dangerous than she'd imagined. Later that evening, Naomi filed a formal request for Darius's military records. The response came back surprisingly fast, a short, official-sounding email that read, "No records found under this name or rank combination." She stared at the message, feeling that now familiar chill return. when she checked her voicemail. Later, there was a message from a blocked number. The voice was calm, too calm. Public defenders who dig too deep sometimes find themselves buried. He's not worth your career or your life. The line went dead. Naomi played it again, not because she needed to hear it twice, but because she needed to be sure she wasn't imagining the weight behind those words. The following morning, she was sitting on a bench outside the courthouse, reviewing the thin stack of papers that represented Darius's case file, when a tall black man with a press badge and a to-go coffee cup approached. "Naomi Grant?" he asked. "Elijah Reed, Bay City Ledger." "I don't speak to reporters," she said without looking up. "I'm not here for quotes," Elijah said, taking the empty seat beside her. "I'm here about a pattern." He slid a file folder onto her lap. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside were mugshots and case summaries. 6 men, all veterans, all homeless, all arrested within the past 12 months by the same officers. Similar charges, all assigned to overworked public defenders. Most had pled out and disappeared. "Into the system. Why are you giving me this?" she asked. "You're the first one challenging the charges," Elijah said. "Everyone else rolled over. And 3 of these guys? No records after sentencing. They vanished." Naomi remembered Griggs's comment from the bar, relayed by the bartender's recording. "We better clean house before the suits get curious." "Again." She closed the folder. "I'll think about it." "Think fast," Elijah said, handing her a card. "Your guy's hearing is in 2 days." That same afternoon, Naomi requested a private meeting with Judge Franklin, who would be presiding over Darius's case. After waiting nearly an hour outside his chambers, she was finally admitted. "Make it quick, counselor," he said, eyes still on his paperwork. "Your Honor," she began, "I have serious concerns about fabricated evidence in the case against Mr. King." "Those are serious accusations," the judge replied, finally glancing up. "Against whom?" "Officer Gregory," she said. "His arrest history shows a pattern. Homeless suspects, same kinds of charges. And I've filed a motion to suppress. The knife and pills. There's reason to believe they were planted." Franklin's eyes narrowed. "And you base this on the word of a transient with no ID, no income, and no credibility." Naomi noticed a photo on the judge's desk. Him shaking hands with Police Chief Hammond at a charity golf event. Casual, familiar. "I'm asking for a fair review of the evidence," she said, her voice steady. "Request noted," he said curtly. "Anything else?" She left his office with a knot in her gut. The very system Darius had once served was now arranged against him, determined to bury him instead of defend him. That night, she received a text from Elijah. "Found something. Meet me at our spot, 7 a.m. sharp." At dawn, Naomi arrived, to find Elijah waiting on the same courthouse bench. He handed her a plastic-sleeved newspaper clipping, old, yellowed, and fragile. "Took some serious digging," he said. It was a photo from a classified mission briefing in 2007. In the foreground, a 4-star general posed for the camera, but behind him, mostly obscured but clearly visible, stood a man in tactical gear, Darius King. Younger, sharper, no name. Tag, no caption, just a ghost. "Why does a soldier like him end up on the streets with no record?" she asked. "That's the question," Elijah replied. "And someone high up is working hard to keep it from being answered." Later that day, Naomi carried that same photo into the jail and placed it on the table in front of Darius. "This is you, isn't it?" Darius glanced at the photo, then away. But she caught it, the brief flicker in his eyes, a muscle tightening. Near his mouth, "Darius," she said softly, calling him by his first name for the first time. "I need you to help me understand, not just the store, all of it." For a long time he said nothing. Then, finally, he sat a little straighter. "You're not just doing this for the case anymore," he said quietly. "No," she admitted. "I want to know why they're so desperate to silence you." Darius studied her carefully, eyes piercing. Then he spoke. "I was a sniper," he began, his voice low and deliberate. "Afghanistan 2002, best in my unit. After a few tours, they moved me to field command and covert ops, real quiet stuff that doesn't make it into newspapers." Naomi didn't interrupt. "We were cleanup, extraction, intelligence, and sometimes cover-ups. When people in power screwed up, we erased the evidence." He paused, folding his hands. "Until I couldn't anymore." He described a 2008 mission gone wrong, civilian casualties. Government contractors with deep connections ordered them to destroy all proof, files, photos, even bodies. "They said it was for national security," Darius said, his tone dark. "I sent copies to a secure drop before the fire. Insurance." 3 days later, his rank was stripped. He was dishonorably discharged, his record classified and then erased entirely. Naomi scribbled notes furiously. "What happened after you came home?" Darius exhaled slowly. "I had a wife, Alicia, a daughter, Leona. She was 8 when I left." His voice cracked for the first time. "Alicia wrote me every week. Promised she'd wait. 2 months after I returned, she died in a car crash. Brake line was cut. They called it driver error. And your daughter? Taken. Social services said I was unstable. PTSD. Dangerous. I had nightmares, flashbacks, started drinking to shut it all out. One night I didn't come home, and the street was easier than pretending the world wanted me." Naomi sat still, heart pounding. "The cops who arrested you," she said, "do you think they're connected to your past?" "No," Darius said slowly. "They're just crooked. But someone's using them. The timing matters." "How so?" "Last month was 15 years since that mission. And 3 weeks ago, one of my old teammates was found dead. Natural causes, they said." His tone said otherwise. When Naomi left the jail, her mind buzzed with possibility and danger. If Darius was telling the truth, and something deep in her gut told her he was, then this case reached into shadows far beyond the courtroom. Determined to uncover the truth, Naomi headed to the records department under the pretense of researching an unrelated case. When the clerk left the desk to fetch a file, she seized the moment and accessed Officer Gregory's arrest history. Within minutes, the pattern emerged clearly. Of his last 40 arrests, more than half were homeless. 7 of them were veterans. At least 5 had been booked on near-identical charges. Resisting arrest, concealed weapon possession, almost all pled guilty within 48 hours. 1 died before making it to court, reportedly due to a pre-existing heart condition. Naomi snapped photos of the evidence using her phone, hands slightly trembling. This wasn't coincidental. It was a system, a pattern of silent erasure. Following a lead Elijah had uncovered, she drove to Ridgecrest Veterans Care Facility on the city's edge. The halls were clean, if underfunded, and sunlight streamed through tall windows as if trying to make the place feel less forgotten. In the far wing, a man in a wheelchair stared through the window at a fading garden. "Mr. Ramirez?" Naomi approached gently. The man turned slowly. His face was scarred from a blast, but the sharpness in his eyes hadn't faded. "You're the attorney," she nodded. "Naomi Grant. Thank you for seeing me." "I didn't think I'd hear his name again," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "How's Darius holding up?" "He's under pressure," she admitted. "But steady. I think what happened to your unit is being buried, and he's paying the price." Ramirez studied her, deciding how much to trust her. "What did he tell you about the operation?" "Night whisper," Naomi said. "The evidence, his discharge, and what came after." Ramirez clenched the arms of his wheelchair. "Darius King was the backbone of our team. A soldier with a conscience, and that made him dangerous." "You mean his file wasn't just sealed?" "No," Ramirez said. "It was deleted, wiped from the system like he never existed. You know what kind of power it takes to do that? Someone way up top still considers him a threat." Naomi left the facility more certain than ever. Darius wasn't just another client. He was a symbol of what happens when someone challenges the wrong people. That night, back at her apartment, Naomi attempted to revisit the military archive site. She typed in login credentials, waited, and the screen abruptly went black. Then a message appeared in bold letters. Access denied. Seconds later, there was a knock at the door. She peered through the peephole. A man in a dark suit stood outside. Posture rigid, not police, not military, something else. Keeping the chain on the door, she opened it just slightly. "Can I help you?" The man's face didn't move. "A message," he said simply, slipping an envelope through the gap. Without another word, he turned and disappeared into the hallway. Naomi opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one word typed in the center: careful. At the jail, Officer Bell made his quiet rounds as usual, but when he passed the break room, he overheard Gregory's voice, low and arrogant. Grant sniffing around the records office. He muttered to Logan, "Just like the last two defenders who got too bold." "She'll fold," Logan replied confidently. "They all do once it gets personal." Bell kept walking, but something had shifted inside him. He'd been watching, documenting, and waiting, and now he knew. Darius's case might be the one that cracked the whole thing open. That night, Darius had a dream. He was back in the desert, the mission that changed everything. He and 4 others moved through a crumbling compound, collecting documents from an enemy hideout. The heat was suffocating, the silence heavy. "Let's go," Lieutenant Marsh called. "We have 9 minutes before the strike." Darius sorted through classified files. One folder made his stomach drop. It was labeled Night Whisper. Inside were logs, American weapons redirected to the black market, with signatures from officials he recognized. "Burn it," Marsh ordered. "Sir, these are American names," Darius protested. "That's a direct order, Sergeant." As the others prepared to torch the evidence, Darius quietly slipped a thumb drive into his vest. A backup, a betrayal, yes, or a safeguard, depending on who you asked. Across town, in a small apartment cluttered with books and old family photos, a 24-year-old woman sat on the floor, letters and photographs spread around her. Aaliyah King, Darius's daughter. She stared at a weathered photo of a man in military uniform, tall, proud, face serious but kind. "Who were you, really?" she whispered. Her mother's diary lay open beside her, an entry circled in red ink. "I think we're being watched. Same black car, parked 3 nights in a row. I told Darius he was being paranoid, but now I'm not so sure." Aaliyah's fingers trembled as she scanned the final paragraph. "If anything happens to me, I hope one day someone finds the truth." Grabbed her laptop and began uploading every photo, letter and page from the diary to a secure forum. She typed, "Looking for information on this man, believed to be former Special Operations, discharged 2008. He's my father, and I need to know what really happened to him." The morning of Darius's preliminary hearing brought new obstacles. Naomi arrived at court early, only to be met by ADA Ben Clark. "We're amending the charges," he announced, smiling smugly. She scanned the document. It included an anonymous witness alleging Darius had threatened people in the park before going to the store. The handwriting struck her. She'd seen it before. Later, alone in her office, she compared the statement to Logan's handwriting from the arrest report. Same slanted loop in the Y, same way of crossing T's. The anonymous witness was fake, and Naomi could prove it. In the courtroom, she presented her findings to the judge. "Your Honor, the anonymous statement submitted by the prosecution appears to be forged. The handwriting matches Officer Logan's from official police records." The judge scowled, clearly uncomfortable. Do you have samples for comparison? Yes, Naomi replied, handing him the documents. After a pause, he said, "The court will strike the anonymous witness testimony from the record, a small win, but a vital one." The walls were beginning to crack. That afternoon, Naomi and Elijah returned to Ridgecrest. This time, Ramirez had a shoebox in his lap, full of old photos. He pulled out one. 6 soldiers standing in front of a helicopter, arms around each other's shoulders. This was our team. Darius, me, and the others. Naomi recognized Darius instantly, his younger self alert and proud. He was supposed to receive the Medal of Valor, Ramirez said, voice thick with emotion. He saved 22 hostages. The ceremony was scheduled, then cancelled, just like that. When? Elijah asked. 2 weeks before they kicked him out. Before they left, Ramirez caught Naomi's wrist. "There's something else," he said quietly. 3 of the men in that photo are dead. Accidents, they said. That leaves me and Darius. He didn't have to say it out loud. Naomi understood. Someone was making sure the past stayed buried. Back at the county jail, Officer Bell sat alone in the locker room, staring at his reflection in the scratched mirror above the sink. For months, he had kept quiet, watching from the sidelines as Gregory and Logan twisted the system. But Darius King wasn't like the others, and Bell couldn't pretend anymore. That night, long after most had clocked out, Bell moved carefully through the nearly empty facility. He waited until the booking area was clear, then used his keycard to enter the evidence room. He scanned the shelves until he found it. The data drive containing body cam footage from Darius's arrest. Heart-pounding, he made a copy onto a USB stick and returned everything exactly as it had been. He didn't take it home. Instead, he walked into the chapel, a barely used storage room converted into a place for quiet prayer. Inside, he opened the leather-bound Bible on the podium and tucked the USB between the pages of the book of Isaiah. A small, ironic act. "Forgive me," he whispered, unsure if he was praying for courage or absolution. Meanwhile, Aaliyah's online post had started gaining traction. On military forums, veterans shared the image she posted of her father in uniform, blurred behind the general. Some recognized the unit insignia. "That's joint task," one post read. "They didn't even use their real names. Those guys ran deep ops, stuff no one wanted on the record." Another user replied, "I served with someone who knew one of them, said they got sent into fire and somehow walked out. Always hush-hush, real ghost squad." Aaliyah continued gathering every reply, building a digital folder of her father's erased legacy. Back on her end, Naomi followed a hunch. Among Darius's personal effects had been a locker key, no label, just an old worn tag with the initials SR etched into it. She checked storage facilities across town and found one, registered under the alias Samuel Rivers. The manager was skeptical until Naomi showed the key and confirmed payment had been coming from an anonymous trust for 15 years. Inside the climate-controlled unit, she found what she'd hoped for: a battered duffel bag, a small military chest, and a leather journal. Inside were photos, handwritten notes, and sealed evidence packets. One photo showed Darius beside high-ranking officials, including generals she'd seen in televised briefings. She opened the journal. Every entry was written in the same precise, soldierly hand. Coordinates, mission summaries, observations. The final pages detailed an arms diversion scandal. American-made weapons routed to warlords instead of allies. Names were listed, signatures included. Naomi stared at the page. One of the names now sat in Washington, in a powerful defense role. "That's why they wiped him," she whispered. Later that night, she drove to her mentor, Robert Vance's home. She trusted few people, but Vance had spent decades navigating legal minefields. He poured 2 cups of black coffee and reviewed the evidence with growing concern. "Judge Franklin won't rule fairly," Naomi said, setting down her mug. "He's Compromised? Darius never stood a chance. Vance nodded slowly. There's talk that Griggs helped the judge's son out of a serious charge last year. Something drug-related, quietly disappeared. Of course he did, Naomi muttered. You want justice? Vance asked. You'll need evidence so public, the court can't hide behind protocol. At the Bay City Ledger, Elijah faced resistance of his own. He presented his article to his editor, meticulously documented patterns of arrests, missing veterans, and law enforcement abuse. But the response was cold. This story's radioactive, the editor said, sliding the printout back. You're naming cops, judges, political donors. We're not touching it. Elijah, this isn't the hill to die on, he added. Elijah didn't argue. He simply walked out. That night, he reformatted the article, stripped the Ledger's branding, and uploaded it to Truthwatch, a whistleblower site known for deep investigative work. Within hours, the story was viral. Justice for Darius, and none of veterans not vagrants, began trending. In her office, Naomi read Elijah's article and felt a new wave of purpose wash over her. Her phone buzzed. A message from a former client, a veteran she'd once defended. I read the piece. I know that man. He saved us in Kabul. If you need a statement, I'm in. More messages came. From veterans, lawyers, journalists. The story had broken through. That night, Naomi opened Darius's journal again. One passage stuck out. It described a mission that ended with US weapons being found in enemy camps, and orders from above to destroy everything. Darius had written, I didn't sign up to protect liars, I signed up to protect truth and people. She snapped the journal shut and picked up her phone. A message from Elijah appeared on the screen. Found her. His daughter. She wants to meet. The next morning, Naomi sat in a quiet coffee shop across from Darius King. She recognized the resemblance instantly, the same quiet strength Darius carried. Darius sat with her back straight, fingers wrapped around a warm cup. You said you represent my father, she said softly. Naomi nodded. He's alive. And he never gave up on finding you. Darius' voice broke slightly. They told me he abandoned us, that he was unstable, that he didn't care. They lied, Naomi said gently. He was silenced, punished, and now they're trying to erase him entirely. Darius reached into her bag and pulled out her mother's diary. She suspected something before the crash. She wrote about being watched, about Darius bringing something home that he shouldn't have. As they spoke, Elijah listened quietly. Then he said, You're a law student, right? Second year, Darius confirmed. I'll help in any way I can. Research, testimony, whatever it takes. There's more, Naomi said. We think your mother's crash wasn't accidental. Darius nodded. I already know. For hours they sat, mapping the pieces. A father erased, a mother silenced. A system built to crush those who resist, but also a chance to push back. Later that afternoon, as Naomi left the courthouse, Officer Bell approached her in the parking lot. He looked exhausted. His uniform was wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. We can't talk here, he said quietly. They walked to a nearby park, sat on a secluded bench. Bell reached into his pocket and pulled out a USB drive. Body cam footage, he said, from Darius's arrest. Gregory didn't know mine was still rolling. Naomi took it slowly, understanding what this meant, and what Bell had risked. This could change everything, she whispered. I saw them plant the knife. I heard Gregory say, this guy saw too much. Let's bury him. Naomi closed her hand around the drive. Thank you. Just make it matter, Bell said, already walking away. That night, Naomi, Darius, and Elijah sat in Naomi's office watching the footage on a secure laptop. The video was clear, unmistakable. Gregory dropping a knife into the bag, Logan adding pills. The conversation damning. We've got them, Elijah breathed. Not all of them, Naomi replied, but it's a start. Aaliyah looked up at the freeze frame of Gregory's hand, caught mid-plant. Once you start pulling the thread, she said, the whole thing unravels. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Naomi's office as she placed the USB drive on her supervisor's desk. Howard Mitchell, head of the County Public Defender's Office, leaned back, arms folded, eyebrows raised. You know what this is, Naomi said. I know exactly what it is, he replied. I also know what happens if we go public with it. She slid a folder toward him. Motions written. All I need is your signature. Mitchell flipped through it, scanning the evidence summaries, Bell's pending statement, and the damning footage stills. You're naming officers, accusing them of planting evidence and implying a cover-up that reaches the bench. I'm not implying anything, I'm proving it. Mitchell closed the folder slowly. You're about to make very powerful people very uncomfortable. Maybe they should be. He sighed. You've got 24 hours before I decide. But Naomi, he lowered his voice. Watch your back. Lines are being crossed here, ones that don't get uncrossed. Outside the building, a black sedan sat parked across the street. Its windows were tinted far too dark to be legal. Naomi noticed it as she walked to her car. The silhouette of someone inside tracked her every move. At the jail, Officer Bell moved, with quiet efficiency, trying to maintain his routine despite the storm inside him. But as he rounded the hallway near the break room, Gregory stepped in front of him. Bell, he said, voice low but loaded with threat. Heard you've been spending a lot of time in the chapel lately. Finding God? Just maintaining order, Bell replied coolly. Funny, Gregory said, leaning in. Security shows you staring a long time at a certain Bible. Makes me wonder what you thought you were hiding in there. Bell's pulse spiked, but he kept his face still. That your brother Miguel? Gregory asked casually. The one with the immigration status still processing? Bell didn't respond. Would be a shame if a call were made. Just a clerical correction. You know how fast that works. Bell's jaw tensed. Are you threatening me? Gregory smiled coldly. No. Just checking that we understand each other. He walked off, leaving Bell leaning against the wall, breath shallow, fear and fury battling for control. That same afternoon, Naomi took Aaliyah to visit Darius at the jail. The guards buzzed them through to the visiting room, where Darius sat at the table already, posture upright, hands folded. When Aaliyah entered, the air changed. Darius's eyes widened, his whole body stilled, not from fear, but disbelief. Leona? Aaliyah hesitated, then nodded. Dad? He reached toward her, but stopped short, afraid to break the moment. You look just like your mother, he whispered. She stepped forward and took his hands. I've been looking for you. His voice cracked. I never stopped thinking about you, not one day. Naomi stepped back, letting them have the space. A quiet, sacred reunion inside a room never meant for healing. When they turned to the case, something had changed in Darius. He sat taller, spoke clearer. There was a fire in him now, something more than survival. Later that evening, Naomi filed a subpoena to bring Officer Bell to testify in court. Judge Franklin reluctantly approved it, hands trembling slightly as he signed. That night, Bell returned to his small East Side apartment. As he inserted his key into the lock, he noticed something, a faint scrape on the doorknob. The air inside felt wrong. He stepped inside cautiously, but before he could draw his off-duty weapon, a figure in black rushed him from behind. Pain exploded in his head. The world tilted. As he collapsed, he caught flashes, gloved hands, dark clothes, and the sickening crack of ribs breaking under blunt force. Somewhere above him, he heard a voice, low, familiar. Next time, it's your brother. Then, silence. At Bayview General Hospital, a nurse leaned over Bell's bruised and swollen face. He was barely conscious, but his eyes fluttered. Open, his hand gripped her wrist. "Find Naomi Grant," he rasped. "Lawyer, give her this." He pressed a flash drive into her palm before losing consciousness again. Meanwhile, Elijah's expose on the whistleblower site continued to spread like wildfire. Veterans groups picked it up, along with civil rights organizations. Social media was ablaze with hashtags like "Justice for Darius" and "Protect Our Vets." Anonymous sources reached out to Elijah through encrypted messages. One provided a redacted mission report, a copy of Night Whisper. It confirmed everything: civilian casualties, weapons trafficking, and Darius's report to command, which was ignored and buried. Back in her office, Naomi pored over Darius's journal again. One entry listed names. One stood out. A man now sitting on the Senate Armed Services Committee. "This isn't just about hiding failure," she muttered. "It's about protecting careers built on the backs of silence." Her phone buzzed. Again. This time, it was Elijah. "We need to meet. Found your client's daughter." Naomi smiled faintly. "Too late. She found me." Across town, Officer Bell lay in his hospital bed, surrounded by wires and machines. But he was alive. And he had spoken. The nurse who received the flash drive managed to deliver it to Naomi by late morning. Inside, there was a full copy of the uncut body cam footage, the same footage that showed Griggs planting the knife, Logan pocketing the pills, and their casual talk about making it stick. That evening, Naomi, Elijah, and Ilea watched the footage again, this time on a secure, encrypted system connected to an offline terminal. "This seals it," Elijah said. "There's no denying it now." "No," Naomi replied. "But we're still not done." Ilea leaned forward. "This is the crack. We pull on it hard enough, the whole thing collapses." Naomi exhaled deeply. "Tomorrow, we take this to court." The courthouse steps were packed. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder, waving signs and American flags, their chants echoing off the marble columns. Reporters jockeyed for position, microphones in hand. Veterans lined the walkway, many in faded uniforms, standing in quiet solidarity. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Uniformed officers sat in the gallery's right wing, a sea of badges and blue. On the left, veterans filled every row, scarred, silent, and watchful. Darius King entered in a grey suit donated by a local non-profit. His frame had thinned from jail, but he carried himself with quiet command, head high, eyes forward. As the guards removed his cuffs, he nodded once to Alia, sitting in the front row. Judge Franklin took the bench, his expression unreadable. "This court is now in session. The state versus Darius King." Naomi stood, steady despite the weight of the moment. "Defense is ready, Your Honor." The prosecution's opening argument attempted to revive their original claim. Darius had posed a threat to public safety, but the tone had shifted. Even Assistant DA Clark spoke with less conviction, his voice flat, his phrasing overly cautious. Naomi rose slowly when it was her turn. "This case," she said, her voice rising with purpose, "isn't just about one man. It's about what happens when the system stops seeing people. It's about a decorated soldier who risked everything for his country and was repaid with silence." She gestured toward Darius. "The evidence will show he was targeted, framed, and nearly buried. But today, the truth finally has a chance to speak." The prosecution called Kyle Benson to the stand. He recited the same version of events. Darius had threatened him, tried to cross the counter. But Naomi pulled up security footage from a neighboring store's camera, the same one Elijah had obtained. It showed Darius standing quietly at the counter, then outside, seated, unmoving. "Mr. Benson," Naomi asked, "why does this footage show my client never acted aggressively? Why does it contradict your testimony?" Kyle shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the officers in the gallery. "I may have misremembered," he mumbled. "It was stressful." "Were you pressured to file a false report?" "Objection." Clark barked. "Sustained," the judge ruled. But the question had already landed. Next, the prosecution called Officers Logan and Turner. Their accounts were crisp, practiced. Darius had resisted. The knife and pills were discovered in his backpack, and he was combative. Naomi's cross-examination unraveled their timeline, exposing contradictions and physical impossibilities. Her final move came swiftly. She called Officer James Bell. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as Bell was wheeled in, face still bruised, jaw wired shut, one arm in a sling. But his eyes were fierce. "Officer Bell," Naomi asked gently, "can you explain to the court what happened to you?" He pointed to his face, then to Logan and Gregory. "They did this," he said through broken teeth. "And why?" "Because I had the truth." Naomi connected a laptop to the monitor. "Your Honor," she said, "with your permission, I'd like to play verified body cam footage recorded by Officer Bell, footage that was not included in the original discovery packet." Judge Franklin nodded. The room fell silent as the video played. Gregory was seen planting the knife. Logan added pills. Their conversation was audible. "Make sure this sticks. He saw too much. Let's bury him." In the gallery, murmurs grew louder. One juror wiped tears. A second looked visibly sick. When the video ended, Naomi said quietly, "No further questions." The prosecution tried to regroup. Clark objected to the footage's admissibility, citing chain of custody concerns, but the judge waved it off. "This court will admit it into evidence." Naomi then called Darius to the stand. He walked slowly but firmly to the witness box, took the oath, and sat with dignity. "Mr. King," Naomi began, "can you explain to the court who you are?" "I'm Staff Sergeant Darius King, former sniper, former team leader, 1st Recon Joint Task Operations Command." "And what happened after your final mission in 2008? He told his story plainly, without theatrics. The failed mission, the orders to cover it up, his refusal, the evidence he preserved, and the consequences that followed. "I was erased because I wouldn't stay silent," he said. "They took my family, my career, my name, but not my voice." When Clark cross-examined, he leaned into the same strategy. "You expect us to believe the U.S. government erased you entirely?" "No," Darius said. "I expect you to believe the evidence, and I expect this court to recognize what was taken, not just from me, but from every veteran treated like I was disposable." Clark had no follow-up. Judge Franklin leaned forward. "Sergeant King, is that your full name and rank as recorded?" "In joint task? Yes, Your Honor." The judge's lips tightened. He looked out across the courtroom. "I remember that name," he said. "I was a JAG officer when your unit's actions came across my desk. I remember a soldier who disobeyed a direct order, not out of defiance, but to save civilians. And I remember thinking that man should be honored, not punished." The judge slowly stood. "This man," he said, voice now rising, "deserves recognition, not ridicule. I ask this courtroom to stand, not for me, but for Staff Sergeant Darius King." The gallery stood. All of it, even the jury, even some of the officers, everyone except Gregory, who sat stiff, seething. Judge Franklin banged his gavel. "The court finds the defendant not guilty on all charges. Furthermore, an independent review will begin immediately into the conduct of the officers involved." Outside, the crowd roared as Darius, Naomi, Aaliyah, and Elijah stepped onto the courthouse steps. Flashbulbs popped. Reporters shouted questions. Veterans saluted. Darius didn't speak. He simply raised his hand, not in anger, not in defiance, but in quiet acknowledgement. Later that evening, in a quiet corner of the city's war memorial, Darius stood alone. He traced the etched names of his fallen teammates with his fingertips. "I told you I'd speak," he whispered, "and now they're finally listening." Weeks later, the fallout rippled. Gregory was arrested by federal agents for civil rights violations, obstruction, and evidence tampering. Logan cooperated in exchange for a reduced sentence. The judge who once protected them resigned. Naomi received national recognition for her work and used her new platform to launch the Veterans Justice Initiative, a legal advocacy group for forgotten servicemen. Elijah's article won multiple awards. Aaliyah finished law school with honors, joining her father's foundation. And Darius? He didn't seek fame. He didn't give interviews. He simply moved into a small home near Aaliyah's apartment and began mentoring at-risk teens, kids who, like him, had nearly been erased. And every morning he walked past a new plaque installed near the courthouse, a bronze engraving that read, "To those who served and were silenced, we see you now." If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to our channel and let us know your favorite moment in the comments.